Hey guys, welcome back to Gatsu Gaming. Today I'm going to give you a little tour of the Elemental Shaman here in BFA Beta. Elemental hasn't seen a ton of changes, but their talent tree's been reworked a little bit. And actually, a lot for the better. The artifact weapon hasn't impacted us too much. In fact, the Shaman for Elemental spec has actually retained pretty much everything I enjoyed about it from raiding with it in Legion. So a quick look at the talent tree, you'll see a couple of things have shifted around. Elemental Blast is now a level 15 talent, as opposed to being a little further down the tree, I believe in the 75 row. But let's just take a look here and see what Elemental Blast now competes with. So in our level 15 row, Exposed Elements is in the first spot here. Earth Shock now increases the damage of your next lightning bolt on the target by 100%. Now this talent here seems a little underwhelming at first, however, whenever you're able to pair this with something like Aftershock, or anything that may decrease the cost of anything, Exposed Elements gets pretty dangerous, especially if you're going to have a guaranteed overload on it. Exposed Elements, again, seems a little boring, but for being a passive, it's actually pretty strong. In the middle row here, we have Echo of Elements. Lava Burst gets 2 charges, and effects that would reset its remaining cooldown will instead grant a charge. This, of course, is also moved from further down the tree up to our top row. A very welcome change, as having this right away when you're leveling is incredibly important. Unfortunately, this is competing with Elemental Blast, however, which is a very unusual thing for Ele Shaman to have to deal with now. This is definitely going to see a lot of play, of course, because people like the double Lava Burst. But Elemental Blast is a very, very strong ability early on because of how much damage the ability does, as well as the amount of crit haste or mastery you get with it. So Elemental Blast is a 12-second cooldown, 1.6-second cast, and what it does is it will give you a buff, either crit haste or mastery. It says 91 here. That's where it starts at. It scales up with level. This also does all of the elements that you have access to: frost, nature, and fire. So it procs things that would also do that, i.e. the legendary ring, i.e. the Twisting Nether from Legion, which a lot of people use that before they get the legendaries that they're actually looking for, because Elemental Blast on live right now is so strong. There is something very similar to that ring, which we'll get to when I take a look at the baseline Azurite traits you get just for moving in to BFA here in a little bit. So the level 30 row here, we have Aftershock, which has been redesigned slightly. Your spells now have a 25% chance to refund the Maelstrom spent on them. This is just flat across the board. It's no longer you just get 30% of it back. You have a 25% chance to get everything back. This is incredibly great. It basically gives you the legendary boot effect from Legion, but as a talent. So anytime where you're not going to be able to make use of Totem Mastery, say there's just a ton of movement, or if you have something where you're playing maybe Exposed Elements and you want to make sure you can weave in those lightning bolts and get them empowered more often, Aftershock is great. Aftershock is also incredibly strong because it works with Earthquake as well now, which is huge for our AoE, and will probably be the default talent we grab in Mythic Plus early on, and it might even beat out Totem Mastery later on, even whenever we get to stand in one place. Master of Elements is essentially the 2-piece tier 21 from Antorus. Spell bonus there. Casting a Lava Burst increases the damage of your next nature or frost spell by 20%. This seems pretty underwhelming until you pair it with Ice Fury, and you're able to get continual procs using things like Echo of Elements. This is a very, very powerful spell, or passive rather, and just empowers your spells a little bit more. Although it is really boring, but hey, it does its job. Then of course you have Totem Mastery, the current top dog in live. So with this, we get to generate an additional Maelstrom every 1 second. Increases the chance for Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning to trigger Elemental Overload by 5%, increases Flame Shock damage over time by 10%, and gives you 2% haste. Now, this doesn't have a cooldown, and it does last for 2 minutes, and those totems will have a 40-yard range on them. So if you're able to drop that, say, in the center of the boss room and you have to kite around, you'll be able to take care of yourself with those totems for pretty much the whole fight. It does use a GCD, and GCDs are very, very important, especially with the changes here in BFA to putting pretty much everything on the global cooldown. However, the benefits of this can definitely outweigh the negatives of having to spend that global cooldown. So how it'll play out with tuning, we'll have to see. I personally just like Aftershock, but I've seen a lot of people running Totem Mastery and doing similar numbers. And if that's the case, I'm very happy to see that that is the case, because I just don't like Totem Mastery. It's something I forget about. 45 row here, this is the same for all Shaman specs. We have Spirit Wolf. While transformed into Ghost Wolf, you gain 5% increased movement speed and 5% damage reduction every 1 second, stacking up to 4 times. Now this only lasts up until the buff will expire once you hit the 4th stack. I think it has like a 5-second or so duration once it gets up there, and then it'll fall off. So it's really great whenever you have to move decent distances in a fight and you may need to heal yourself, but you really can't because you can't stop moving. This will give you just a little bit more damage reduction. Earthshield is kind of curious that it's in a DPS spec, to be honest, but it works out pretty well. 400 mana, 1 target only, of course. Protects the target with an Earthen Shield, increasing healing on them, well, your healing on them, I should say, by 10%, and heals them for around 1,000 whenever they take damage, has 9 charges. That heal can only happen once every 3 to 4 seconds, somewhere around there. This is really useful when you're leveling, just because it gives you some passive healing, and it gives you something to track, more or less. As far as will you use it in Mythic Plus and that, probably not, because Static Charge is just that much stronger. Reduces the cooldown of your Capacitor Totem by 5 seconds for each enemy it stuns, up to a maximum reduction of 20 seconds. So as long as you hit 4 targets with your Stun Totem, it has a 40-second CD, which is incredible for the amount of stun you get out of it. This will definitely be the one you're taking in Mythic Plus most of the time. It's very rare you'd take anything else, most likely. Level 60 row here, we have High Voltage. Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning can now cause a second Elemental Overload. This essentially doubles the effect of your Mastery. This is an incredibly powerful tool. It is completely passive, of course, and because I went into a very Aftershock-heavy build, I decided to run with High Voltage, and this is very, very strong. It definitely does quite a bit of damage. Storm Elemental replaces your Fire Elemental. It brings you out every 2.5 minutes. You can get a Greater Storm Elemental. It'll cause wind damage to your enemies for 30 seconds, and then while this is active, each time you cast Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning, the cast time of Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning is reduced by 3%, stacking up to 20 times. So if you're able to get 20 casts out in 30 seconds, at the very end there, you'll have, you know, a 60% essentially haste on your Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning. And the problem, of course, is that very early on, it's going to be very unlikely that we have that kind of haste to be able to get those out there, as well as mechanics in boss fights will make it difficult to stack that up. However, if you know you need very heavy, strong burst, or you have a very tight enrage time or something like that, Storm Elemental could definitely be your pick, most likely paired with exposed elements and an Aftershock there as well. Very, very, very powerful tool when you can make use of it to its fullest. Liquid Magma Totem. This is still pretty much the AoE pick. If you're going to be pulling real big, Liquid Magma Totem drops a totem down for 15 seconds. It just spews lava at every target within range, every 0.8 seconds, for about, it says 322 fire damage to all enemies within 8 yards. It doesn't seem like a whole lot, but keep in mind that damage in general is scaled down quite significantly in BFA. So 322 is actually pretty substantial when you're talking about maybe, 6-7 mobs getting hit by this. Our 75 row here, this is the same for all the Shaman specs except for Enhancement. They don't have Ancestral Guidance there, but the Resto and Elemental Trees do. So Nature's Guardian, when your health is brought below 35%, you instantly heal for 20% of your maximum health. This can only occur once every 45 seconds. This is just completely passive. You shouldn't die from mechanics too often with this. If you're doing some dangerous pulls, if explosive sticks around, this is really strong. It's something you can, set it and forget it, which is sometimes very welcome, other times not. But not dying on a fairly squishy class is definitely something to look at and go, okay, do I need this for this? Is the damage going to be high enough? Most of the time I've said yes, this is totally worth it. Ancestral Guidance gives you a 2-minute cooldown, where for 10 seconds, 25% of your damage and healing is converted to healing on up to 3 nearby injured party or raid members. Ancestral Guidance typically is not very strong, unless of course you're in a very heavy AoE situation where you can essentially keep a group up pretty much without the healer, if you're spamming Chain Lightning and you have Earthquakes going. This is very powerful when you pair it with Stormkeeper and Aftershock for those Earthquakes. So it definitely will have its uses when you're pulling super big, and can of course save you in a pinch at times. The damage that you're doing is 100% what your healing is going to come from. So you have to be very careful when you use it, and if you're not able to maximize your DPS time during Ancestral Guidance, it's kind of moot to take it at all. Windrush Totem, again, kind of curious that it's in this tier, but I can see why. If you don't need the healing, this could help you, speed up your group just a little bit. Summons a totem at the location for 15 seconds, continually granting all allies who pass within 10 yards 60% increased movement speed for 5 seconds. This can be very useful when you have to move quickly across a room just to get your group to move. Very similar to how Stampeding Roar for Druid is used. Level 90 row here, we have a rather interesting row. So we have, our first thing here is Earth and Rage. Your damage spells incite the earth around you, come to your aid for 6 seconds, repeatedly dealing 294 nature damage to your most recently attacked target. This is, I believe, the weakest 100 row talent right now for Elemental on live. No, this is actually level 15 talent on live, isn't it? This is a pretty boring talent, and it really doesn't do a whole lot. However, if you're not able to make use of your elementals for whatever reason, if you don't like having direct control over them, or you're not feeling you should really be using them all that much, which is not something you should ever think, your elementals are super strong, then Earth and Rage might be for you. It's completely passive, it's easy to do, you don't have to do anything special with it. You just deal damage, and it'll go ahead and do some extra damage for you. Depending on how it's tuned, it could be mildly competitive. I don't ever see it being the best talent just because it is completely passive. Primal Elementalist here, your Earth, Fire, and Storm Elemental, whichever one you summon, are drawn from the Primal Elementals. Ooh, they're 80% more powerful than your regular Elementals. They get additional abilities, and you gain direct control over them. Now, the reason I've taken this is because whenever you take the Fire Elemental with Primal Elementalist, it gives you a Meteor, which is a ton of AoE damage, which for me early on has been incredibly powerful, and I really don't feel like playing Ice Fury at the moment. I don't feel it's tuned very well, so I've been taking Primal Elementalist for testing, and it's been doing really well. The Meteor from the Fire Elemental is very strong. The extra power on that Earth Elemental, be able to make it pick a specific target, is also very useful when, things hit the fan and you have to help out with your Earth Ellie. So just overall, this is a very strong talent here, and is probably going to be the one that most people take, even at least while they're leveling solo, probably, just because of the extra power of your elementals at that point. Ice Fury makes your rotation slightly more complicated. It's really not that much of a complication, though. It's pretty easy to pick up once you get used to it. It generates 15 Maelstrom now on a 30-second cooldown, throws ice at the target, and causes your next 4 Frost Shocks to deal 60% increased damage. Great when you need to do something while you're moving, because obviously we don't have Move While Cast Lightning Bolt anymore. That was gone back from Draenor, so we don't have that anymore, unfortunately. But this will give us something to do while we are moving. It's also great when you're kiting, because it will help you get a little bit of extra damage out of those Frost Shocks, so you're not hitting like a wet noodle. This is very powerful when you pair it with Master of Elements, and you're able to get those procs from your Lava Burst to increase the damage of those Frost Shocks even further. Now the last row is a little goofy at this point. I'm going to start over here with Ascendance. We still have our Ascendance cooldown. It does only last 15 seconds. It is still on the global cooldown. Transform to a Flame Ascendant for 15 seconds. Changes your Chain Lightning over to a Lava Beam. Removes the cooldown on Lava Burst, so you can just spam it, which is what you should be doing for sure. And increases the damage of Lava Burst by an amount equal to your critical strike chance. So when you take Ascendance, of course, probably your most important stat for that burst window is going to be crit. The problem with Ascendance right now is that we actually lose a full global cooldown going into it now, which, all in all, we don't lose damage out of it. We're getting a huge damage increase with Ascendance, but with the stats being generally lower in BFA, Ascendance doesn't feel as strong. So unless we are stacking a ton of crit, Ascendance probably will not be the one we take. Stormkeeper, however, is incredibly strong, incredibly useful. It has a 1.2 second cast and a 1 minute CD. This is essentially our artifact ability retooled a little bit to go with the new design of the class, which is just a minor rework. Charge yourself with lightning, causing your next 2 lightning bolts or chain lightnings to be instant cast and trigger an elemental overload on every single target. The best part about the new Stormkeeper is that instead of just your first lightning bolt or chain lightning being a guaranteed overload, it is now both. So you get 2 very, very strong lightning bolts or chain lightnings. They're guaranteed to overload, and it is very, very great to see that change. It's actually what I was hoping we would see during Legion, but hey, we got it here, so I can't complain too much. Now, our very last talent here, I don't know anyone that really likes this talent. This is Unlimited Power, which is honestly not what it should be called. It should be called Wet Noodle or something like that. When your spells cause an elemental overload, you gain 2% haste for 10 seconds. Gaining a stack does not refresh the duration. The issue I have with this talent is that unfortunately with the level of stats we have, Unlimited Power just does not feel as though it is ever up at any sort of reasonable level where we're going to see it. I mean, we do overload quite a bit, but with it only being a 10-second buff and only 2% haste per stack, it just doesn't feel all that great. Now, if we end up doing this and pairing it with Storm Elemental, I can definitely see it being very, very strong, because we're going to get an insane amount of haste out of that. But unless we're pairing it with Storm Elemental, I don't think you can take Unlimited Power at all. I don't think it'll work out being more damage overall and more consistent than Stormkeeper or even Ascendance with low crit. So like I said, not a huge fan of Unlimited Power. I'm sure as we toy around with talents a bit and they do some tuning, this might become more powerful. This might just be the talent that we need a little bit of gear to make work. Hopefully that's the case. I'm not a huge fan of stacking haste buffs that don't refresh duration. It's just not my thing. So that there is the talent tree. Let's take a quick peek at our spellbook here. There isn't a whole lot in here that has changed. We still have our Resurrection, of course. We still have our, essentially, her stone replacement. We still have our wonderful shield wall here, 1.5 minute cooldown, 40% less damage for 8 seconds. Pretty much the only cooldown we have to stay alive, but it is incredibly strong and will save us from most scary things. Capacitor Totem. This is now a 2-second delay followed by an AoE stun for every enemy within 8 yards for 3 seconds. This is one of the few AoE stuns left that hasn't had its duration nerfed down below 3 seconds, so definitely very useful for Shaman in general for Mythic Plus. Oops, didn't want to do that. So we have Chain Lightning here. They have changed the Maelstrom generation of this quite a bit. 40-yard range, 1.6 second cast, hurls Lightning Bolt at the enemy, dealing 643 nature damage, and then jumping to additional nearby targets. Affects 5 total targets. Generates 3 Maelstrom per target hit. The Maelstrom generation is down a little bit, however, it doesn't feel too terrible when we're AoEing, because there are so many groups that are 5 or more mobs. Whether or not they're all elites is another story. But most dungeons have quite a few packs where there's 3 or more mobs constantly, so Chain Lightning will get a lot of use. Cleanse Spirit removes a curse, puts us on par with mages for what we can cleanse. Definitely keep this keybind handy. You're going to need it quite a bit in quite a few dungeons. There's so many curses that do so much in these dungeons right now. Earth Elemental here calls forth your Earth Elemental to protect you and your allies for a minute. Incredibly useful to save your group from a wipe whenever something horrible has happened to your tank, or whenever something terrible happens and you pulled far too much while you're leveling. Super useful. Make sure you have this on a bar somewhere, of course, because it's just too useful not to use it. Earthshock has been redesigned. It no longer has a scaling Maelstrom structure. It is just a flat 60 Maelstrom. It instantly shocks the target with Concussive Force, dealing about 5,300 nature damage. I have seen this crit for an absurd amount so far. Mine were hitting for around 16k with my increases to Mastery and everything like that. I also am, though, wearing pretty decent gear on beta right now. This is my character copy over from live, so it may have something to do with that as well. My gear level's pretty high for my level. But in general, when I was testing, Earthshock hits very hard, and as long as you're keeping up Elemental Blast, you're going to get it to crit almost all the time. It's wonderful how strong this hits, especially whenever you can chain gun it with Aftershock. Earthbind Totem here drops down an AoE snare. It doesn't actually have the percentage movement speed decrease listed on it anymore. I believe it does on live, but it doesn't here. I think it's about a 30% snare. It could be as high as 50, though, but I'm not entirely sure because I haven't actually seen the debuff in a while. But Earthbind Totem is super useful when you have to kite, when you have to get away. It definitely helps you in multiple instances when you just need to make sure that not everything is on top of you at once. Earthquake has also gotten rid of that scaling Maelstrom structure. It is now a flat 75 Maelstrom, which seems like an absolute ton, and it is. However, it now hits pretty hard compared to what it used to, and the knockdown effect is incredibly powerful. There's a lot of things that you can't interrupt right now in these dungeons, and Earthquake will still knock them over and prevent them from casting. Very, very strong AoE, and when paired with Aftershock to get multiple down, you can have groups that just stand there and just keep falling over. They'll stand up, they'll fall over again. It's pretty cool. Elemental Blast, of course, that is a talent. We already went over that. Super strong, probably your default choice. Farsight, you can take a peek into the Great Yonder and see what's over there. Pretty much just using your wandering around, and you have to check and see if a rare spawns up or something. So Fire Elemental has also been redesigned slightly here. It calls forth a greater Fire Elemental to rain destruction on your enemies for 30 seconds. While the Fire Elemental is active, Flame Shock generates 3 Maelstrom when it deals damage over time. So of course, whenever you're playing Elemental Shaman, regardless, you want Flame Shock up all the time. And this just gets you extra Maelstrom for having Flame Shock out. Now Flame Shock now is actually, they put a 6-second cooldown on it here in beta, which I didn't like at first, but it actually works out okay. It has a guaranteed duration of 18 seconds because there's no Maelstrom listed to it anymore. Your Maelstrom is literally only used for Earthshock and Earthquake at this point, which I'm completely okay with. That is fine. It is a good change. It's a very good change. So Flame Shock, it does a little bit of damage at first, and then it ticks decently hard. With Fire Elemental out, of course, it does some extra damage, gets you more Maelstrom. You should be able to keep this up on 3 targets relatively easily, and you actually never had this on more than 3 targets at once anyway, in Legion to begin with. So it doesn't change a whole lot, except that it now has a 6-second CD. Frost Shock, of course, no longer has a Maelstrom cost associated to it at all. Chills the target with Frost. It deals around 1,000 Frost damage right now, and reduces the target's movement speed by 50% for 6 seconds. This is empowered by Ice Fury if you're running it, and by Exposed Elements. Very, very powerful kiting tool. I use it quite a bit when I'm fighting rare spawns, just to keep them from catching up to me. Otherwise, though, if you're not running Ice Fury, you won't use this too much except for the snare. We have our Ghost Wolf here, gives us 30% increased movement speed, and keeps us from being reduced below 100%. Really good for getting away from anything you need to get away from, especially when paired with that talent, the Spirit Wolf. So, when in doubt, pop Wolf and run like hell. Healing Surge, just a pretty decent, useful heal. We won't be able to use too many of these before we're but every once in a while you can save the life of a party member with it, or just heal yourself up after combat. Heroism, Bloodlust, whatever you want to call it, depends on your faction, of course. 30% haste for 40 seconds, 5-minute cooldown. you know, invaluable to any raid, amazing in any Mythic Plus group. It's like you want this in every group, who'da thunk? So we still have Hex, of course, 30-second cooldown, 1 minute duration. When hexed, the victim is incapacitated and can't attack or cast spells. Damage sometimes breaks the effect, it doesn't always. Sometimes you have a very durable frog that refuses to move. Limit 1, and you can only use it on humanoids and beasts. Most mobs are humanoid and beasts. There's only a couple of instances where you can't use this to some degree. You know, always useful. And there's a frog version. I think I have 2 other ones here. Yeah, I have a compy and a cockroach. So you can always change it up. You have more than one shaman so that everyone knows whose target is whose. Lava Burst is now always a guaranteed crit, regardless of if Flame Shock is up or not, which is great. Generates you 8 Maelstrom, has an 8-second CD, just throws lava at them, and it's 1138 fire damage, but it's always a crit. And we have 250% crit as a shaman, so it hits fairly hard. This is one of your top priority spells for sure. Lightning Bolt is your filler spell, just generates 6 Maelstrom, pretty boring. This is your bread and butter when you have nothing else to do. Purge, make sure this is on a very comfortable keybind. This pulls off 1 beneficial magic effect. It does cost some mana, and you can go pretty quick with it now. I believe this puts it fairly close to where Mage's Spell Steal is for mana cost, which is fine, because purging too much, you know, should have some sort of a detriment to you. There's lots of things to purge, and there's lots of boss mechanics that you can purge as well, so be sure this is on a comfortable keybind. I cannot stress that enough. Thunderstorm, we still have that there. Calls down a bolt of lightning. Deals 223 nature damage to all enemies within 10 yards. Gives them a 40% snare for 5 seconds and knocks them away from you. You can use this while stunned. Be very careful when using this. In a lot of instances, mobs are very close together, and if you knock them into another pool, it could mean certain death for your entire group. Definitely still one of the best abilities if you have to interrupt something or get something out of Sanguine. Great utility, which no other class really brings baseline. Tremor Totem is something you're going to see a lot of use of in this expansion as well. It just gives you that 1 minute CD here, where for 10 seconds it gets rid of every fear, charm, and sleep effect on your party or raid within 30 yards. There's a couple of bosses where this is incredibly useful. There's a lot of trash where this is useful. Make sure you have this keybound somewhere. You're definitely going to use it quite a bit. Water walking, run across that water. Lots of that while leveling. If you don't have the Water Strider, this is one of the coolest abilities to have. We have the lowest cooldown interrupt in the game. Wind Shear, 30-yard range, 12-second cooldown. Just interrupts whatever they're casting and prevents anything in that school from being cast for 3 seconds. Obviously, make sure this is on a very comfy keybind as well. You're going to use it a ton. And you should definitely be in every interrupt rotation you can be. Just because of how short your cooldown is. So Elemental Fury here, this is one of our passives. Damaging crit strikes deal 250% damage instead of the normal 200%, making crit a very valuable stat for Elemental in general. If you're stacking a lot of crit, so obviously you'd be going for Ascendance at that point, most likely. Elemental Fury is just really cool as far as seeing those real big numbers pop up. Fulmination damage, this is basically where our Maelstrom generation comes from. There's no way to influence this at the moment that I have seen, but damage from your Lightning Bolt generates 6 Maelstrom, Lava Burst generates 8 Maelstrom, and your Chain Lightning generates 3 Maelstrom per target hit. This is great that it's a passive listed like this, so they can tweak this as they need, and not have to worry about, messing anything up on the back end whenever they have this here where it's easily displayed for everyone so everyone knows what they're getting. Lava Surge just gives your Flame Shock the 15% chance, anytime it deals damage over time, to reset the cooldown on Lava Burst and cause your next Lava Burst to be instant. Something you'll definitely want to have, either a weak aura or just in general you really got to pay attention to so you don't miss out on the big damage and the Maelstrom generation you get out of those free Lava Bursts. Our mastery has not changed. It is still that your Lightning Bolt, Elemental Blast, Lava Burst, and Chain Lightning casts have a chance to trigger a second cast on the same target for 85% of normal damage, and they generate less Maelstrom because they're a free attack. My mastery is very high right now. on the beta because I have heavy mastery gear for the build I was playing on live. So keep in mind that the number of 64.9% is because of the current gear that I'm wearing, not a baseline super high amount of mastery. And we still have reincarnation. Every 30 minutes we can die and pick ourselves back up. It does not count as a battle res, thank goodness. Great when you need to hop up and just finish off that fight, or if you want to be used as a sacrificial lamb for a mechanic. I've done it quite a bit on progression just to make sure that no one else died from something. The last thing I wanted to show you here was that piece of Azurite gear. So this here is just the baseline first piece that you get when you pop into BFA. So there's a couple of things here. The baseline thing you see is Champion of Azeroth. Your spells and abilities have a chance to increase your secondary stats by 12 for a minute, stacking up to 4 times. This buff will not fall off if you're constantly doing something, so it ends up being a fairly sizable little increase to all your secondaries. Enhancement gets Strength of the Earth. Rockbiter causes your next melee ability other than Rockbiter deal an additional 546 nature damage if you choose this one. And then the Resto one here that requires Resto. If a target on your Riptide is below 50% of their max health, Riptide causes them to absorb up to 1,680 damage for 8 seconds. Essentially giving Resto basically a mini absorb early on. So these here are really strong in general for their respective specs. Champion of Azeroth is the one that literally everyone gets, so if you're not a huge fan of those spec-specific traits, you can pick this instead. Now, for Elemental, the one you guys really care about is this doozy, Natural Harmony. Dealing fire damage grants you Crit Strike for 12 seconds. Dealing frost damage grants you Mastery for 12 seconds. Dealing nature damage grants you 112 haste for 12 seconds. Now, with Natural Harmony being from that first Azurite piece, there's almost no reason you should not take Elemental Blast right away, because that will give you all of these buffs, plus what Elemental Blast gives you. So super, super useful if this stays here, which I really hope it does, because it really is just going to help so many people power through those early levels. And you're actually going to wear this piece for a very long time. It is a very high item level piece. It is just below the baseline max level gear you get from questing. And that's before you move further down and get the extra 5 item levels on it in the center here. Now the second row, you get Vampiric Speed. When an enemy you harm dies, you heal for a little bit and you gain some speed. This is great, just because as a shaman you will be taking damage guaranteed unless you're incredibly good at kiting, which I'm not. But this is just great, especially whenever you're AoEing things. Every enemy that dies, you'll just heal to full half the time he pulls super big. And then, of course, if that's not going to be the case and you're, super careful, every 30 seconds getting an Absorb Shield for a little bit for 30 seconds. In general, this is just an incredibly well-designed piece of gear. It just gets you your primary stats here. Just Int and Stam or Agi and Stam if you're Enhancement. Very, very awesome piece of gear. This is what we start the expansion with, is a 275 piece. To put that into perspective, legendaries are at 265, and the Pantheon trinkets, when they're maxed out, are at item level 280. So that gives you a general idea of where the gear goes to, and just how powerful the Spalders of the Champion actually are baseline. So that's going to do it for Elemental Shaman today. The biggest thing I can say about this is that... Oh, I got DC'd. The biggest thing I can say about Elemental Shaman is that it's going to be a very strong option whenever you want to go and run Mythic Plus, dungeons, farm, etc. It is super useful, has a ton of utility, and as long as they keep the tuning done the way I believe they're headed, it's also going to be a very, very strong option in Mythic Plus. So thanks for watching, guys. Be sure you hit that like button if you liked the video. Toss me a subscribe if you haven't yet. Leave me a comment, let me know how terrible the video was if it was. I'm pretty sure it was alright, but hey, you guys are the judges, right? So you guys have a great day, and I'll catch you next time.